محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask him to send his peace and blessings upon our dear beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and family members and his companions and all those who follow their example till the day of judgment, praying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us amongst them. Allahumma ameen. Let's remind each other very quickly what were the first 7 hadith that we covered. The first one. So it starts off إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. The title of it is لَا عَمَلَ إِلَّا بِنِيَّةٍ. Actions are only, there is no action without an intention. The second hadith, Maratib al-Din, the levels of faith, al-Islam wal-Iman wal-Ihsan. Number 3, pillars of Islam, Arkan al-Islam. Number 4, al-Khalq wal-Ajal wal-Rizq. Number 5, denouncing innovations, Inkarul bid'ah. Number 6, cautious piety and sincerity, al-Wara' wal-Ikhlas. Number 7, النصح من أصول الإسلام. That nasiha is of the fundamentals or the main principles of Islam. So number 8 and 14, we started 8 a little bit last week, and we're going to cover both of them just because they're closely related. And in the scope of this class, their deeper explanation is not what we're aiming for. So there's a much more in-depth, and I know we've been saying that about a lot of the hadiths, because the purpose of this class is to take from these ahadith what we need for everyday living and what every Muslim must know or would greatly benefit from knowing. So the finer details will naturally be available for those who are interested. And 40 Nawawi is one of those texts that you take at every stage in your journey. You take it in your beginning as one of the introductory texts to learning about Islam, something very, very basic. And then you take it on later on when you get exposed to some other concepts and more in-depth knowledge. It's beneficial then. And then you should take it again on an advanced level, and it's one of those courses that you can't get sick of because of the amount of benefit and explanations that have been done about it all throughout our history. So it's something that is relevant to every single stage of Islamic learning, beginning, intermediate, and advanced. So naturally, we won't get into too many of the advanced things, if any at all, but for that reason, we're grouping them together because a lot of the concepts that require more in-depth explanation we're not going to get into as we're going to see inshallah. Hadith number 8 عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يشهدوا أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة فإذا فعلوا ذلك عصموا مني دماءهم وأموالهم إلا بحق الإسلام وحسابهم على الله تعالى. Ibn Umar, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him and his father, he says that the Prophet ﷺ said, I have been commanded to fight against the people until they testify that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and that they establish the salah and pay the zakah. And if they do so, then they will have gained protection from me for their lives and their property, unless in accordance to Islam. And will be with Allah the Almighty. So we already spoke a little bit preliminary about this hadith. We spoke about Abdullah ibn Umar as well. Someone were to come and tell you this hadith is proof that Islam is an aggressive, warmongering religion that seeks to force people to convert by way of the sword, what would your response be? Islam came to physically force all people to be Muslim. Your Prophet ﷺ said it clearly here. That I've been commanded to fight people until they say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, they pay zakah and they pray salah. And until then, or only after then, is their wealth and their property, their person and their property protected. What is the context? It doesn't say that here. He didn't say, I've been commanded to fight the Arabian Peninsula. He said people. Are you asking me? I'm saying if someone will come to ask you, you can't answer with a question. It's not how it works. Either have a confident answer. Don't ask me questions, Ammar. So the context, you're right, the context, but that by itself is not enough. The greater context is his biography, number one. We look at his biography, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Was it constantly fighting people and forcing them to become Muslims? It's not what he did at all. The vast majority of his da'wah was verbal, inviting people to Islam, speaking to them, reading to them the Quran, explaining to them. And even in the battles that he fought, the conflict was minimal compared to what the Arabian Peninsula was used to before that, and compared to anything else. If you want to go from society to society, religion to religion, the amount of conflict, armed conflict that he engaged in compared to all else was minimal. So they have no type of grievance or bone to pick with Islam in the way that it started, because it pales in comparison to their history and their legacy and their civilizations and societies until today. Until today, with what the powers do to force people to bow and to quiver in front of their way of life and their rules. So that's number one. What else? Sure, but we want the answer now. So that's definitely not wrong if you don't know the answer, to say, I don't know the answer and I'll get back to you, but I want the answer now. That's what we're here for. You're all Muslim adults. And if you're almost guaranteed to get this question, whether you're in college or not. I was about to say if you're in college, but irrespective of whether you're a college student or not, this is something that most likely will come your way from non-Muslims or Muslims themselves who are confused, who have no idea where to begin with any of this. So one is the biography. Ask someone, did you read the biography of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The vast majority of people, Muslim and not, again, will say no. How many people here have read the biography of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam cover to cover at least once in their life? Well, I'll count that as two, listening. But there's a special merit to reading it because you'll have way more details and go through a lot more. But listening to it is not bad as well. So you take that survey in any Muslim or non-Muslim gathering and you'll get about an 80% never. So okay, go read it and let me know what you think afterwards. Then you could start to compare it to a hadith like this, when you see his life and what he sallallahu alaihi wasallam preached and acted upon. By the end of his life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have almost the entirety, if not the entirety of the Arabian Peninsula is Muslim, and that was not done by warfare. Yemen, no army goes to Yemen. Bahrain, no army goes to Bahrain. And these areas, they all become Muslim or pledge allegiance to him, and this is not done through warfare. And in fact, a huge portion of the land that is controlled by the Muslims at the end of his life, there's huge swaths of non-Muslims. By the end of the four Khulafa, his direct successors, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, radiallahu anhum, and Al-Hasan, you'll see that the majority of the constituents are non-Muslims. Over 90% of the people in the Ummah at the time, the political, geographical borders of the Ummah are not even Muslim. So if this is what the hadith meant, then why they left to profess their faith? Shouldn't they be forced? Shouldn't they be fought against until they become Muslim? So it's clearly not what it means, and you could see that in his life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in the life of his successors, his immediate successors for the next 4 decades. In fact, the Ummah's majority non-Muslim for the first 200 years, all the way up until maybe 200 Hijri, before something of a Muslim majority starts to appear in major areas. But in fact, the entire Ummah in its entirety, the majority turning into Muslim lands in the sense that everyone is a Muslim, takes a very long time, maybe 200 to 300 years. And if anyone claims, okay, you're backtracking, whitewashing your history, you're trying to make it sound appealing, this is the classical Muslim explanation for centuries from the very beginning. Just it's very easy to look that up in any classical book and see that this is what has been reported for the centuries since this hadith has been told by the Prophet ﷺ. So that's all that we covered. Now we need to find the explanation. So this is all just a response to someone who might make that claim. So we have now the explanation itself. What does the hadith mean? I've been commanded to fight. If it doesn't mean what it says at face value, then what does it mean? So it's not metaphorical, no. It's not just an expression. It actually means what it means. But there's a couple of asterisks. So the first thing is, who's an-nas? Is the word an-nas itself. That's the focus of the hadith, which means people. But it's general. I've been commanded to fight people. So when you translate, yes, sir. So that's directly stated in the hadith. People who don't pay zakah, who don't pray, who don't testify La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, these are the conditions. But what does it mean in the details that we want to look into? Number one is, the first thing that we want to highlight is, it's a general word, but doesn't mean the general meaning. Doesn't mean all people, according to most scholars. The majority, and we're going to get into the other. Does this need batteries? What's up with this thing? Okay, we'll figure. So the first thing is the word an-nas. It's a general word, but it could mean something specific. And maybe the cable, yeah. If we switch to the will that make a difference? So the word an-nas is a general word, but it could mean something specific. And this is jazakumullah khairan, guys. This is a very common tool in most languages, and in the Arabic language, it's something that's present all over. There's many examples. We'll just mention one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Imran, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسِ إِنَّ النَّاسِ قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ فَاخْشَوْهُمْ فَزَادَهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَ اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. He says, those people who the people told them that the people have gathered against you, so fear them. So the people is used 3 times here. Twice in the word an-nas and once in al-ladhina, which means those people. So all 3 people can't be the same, right? They can't be the same. The people who the people told them that people have gathered against you, so you have to fear them. And they replied, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal. So it only increased them in faith when they were told that, and they replied, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sufficient for us, and He's the best disposer of affairs. So all 3 people can't be the same, because then that wouldn't make any sense. The people who told themselves that they themselves are going to gather against them, that doesn't make any sense. So obviously all 3 indicate different groups of people. The first group is the Sahaba, the Muslims, who people told them. Who are these people? There's a few opinions, but they all kind of go around the same thing. Some say it's the munafiqeen in Medina, the hypocrites. Some say it was a group of people who were paid to do propaganda. That Quraysh had told them, tell the Prophet ﷺ, tell the Muslims in Medina that we're gathering a strong force. So you're in huge trouble. You guys cannot put up a resistance against us. And some say this happened before Uhud or right after, because right after Uhud, as you know, the Muslims suffered a setback and they separated for some time from Quraysh. And then Quraysh was on their way back to Mecca, and they realized, wait, why don't we go try to finish them off? Why don't we try to make another effort we didn't accomplish our goals. The Prophet ﷺ is still alive, Islam is still ongoing. So they considered that, and then they changed their mind, and they found people along the way who lived in the desert, and they say, hey, why don't you, if you see Muhammad ﷺ and you see the companions, you tell them that they're in real trouble because we're gathering to fight them again. So it was a scare tactic. It was an effort to peddle propaganda. And then the third people, in the nas qad jama'u lahum, the people who gather against them, that's Quraysh for sure. So we see how the same word could be used in the same context even, and every single time the word is used means something different. It's not something strange in the Arabic language. And in usul al-fiqh, this is a concept that's called al-am, which is a general word like an-nas. Urida bihi khas. That is meant to reference something specific. And we do that, or al-amal wal-murad bihi al-khusus. The terminology is not particularly important for us, but it means a general word that a specific meaning is intended. And that's what we do even in English language, right? If you tell someone, give me a hand, what do you mean? Help me, right? If you tell someone, give me a hand, and they do this, you're going to smack them. You say, if you're carrying something huge, say, can you give me a hand? They say, sure, I have 2 of them, right? No one's going to find that funny, and if you're struggling with something heavy. So you can say, it's a metaphor, it's a saying that means, I don't want your hand, I want your help. Your hand is representative of your help. So it's a very common thing in language where these statements are used, or these general words are used with specific meanings intended. So who are the people then? So if it's not all people, who are the people here in this hadith? The majority of the scholars have said this is the Arabian Peninsula, the Arab specifically. I've been commanded to fight the Arabs, the Arab tribes in Mecca, in Medina, in the surrounding lands, in the entire Arabian Peninsula, until they testify that there is no God except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that I am His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that they establish their prayer and they establish zakah. And that is what will make them enter into this ummah. They have no choice. What was the normal system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending prophets? He sends a prophet to a group of people. He performs miracles. He debates with them. He's patient with them. They go back and forth for decades or centuries. Then what happens? What happens? If they refuse. If they refuse up until that appointed time, they're destroyed. The entire society is destroyed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a supernatural punishment that destroys them in their entirety. So what happened to the people of Hud, the people of Salih, the people of Lut, the people of Shu'aib, and people of Nuh, on and on. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to do that with this ummah. He sent the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he shows them the miracles, and they go back and forth for decades as well. And they're going to be given respite, they're going to be given time to accept or reject without any of this supernatural punishment coming in this fashion. Instead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated jihad, specifically against the Arab tribes, that you will force them. They will be forced to either accept the Islamic governance or the religion. Because Islam needed a focal point. It needed a cradle for which it can use that launching pad to go to the rest of the world. So the Arabs had no choice. They had to accept the faith. And even then, it was not done under threat of killing. That if you don't accept the faith, you're killed. That's never happened in the Prophet ﷺ's life. And it's not something that Islam condones, that you either accept the faith or you are killed. But what had happened is that all these tribes were invited to Islam, were given time, but eventually they would have no choice but to come into the fold of Islam. This was something specific to the Arabian Peninsula, that they must be subdued. Why is that? Besides what I just said, which is Islam needs a cradle of civilization, needs a focal point for which it will start its message to the rest of the world. What in particular is special about these people? What else is special about the Arabian Peninsula? So from a political standpoint, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted this to be the cradle of faith, so it had to be pure, Islam had to be superior here. But what else about the people? Yeah, Yasin?
About the people or about the specific place?
Either.
I was going to say that, like, geographically, it's like in a place where it can spread very easily.
Yeah, Yasin? I mean, Amir? Sorry. Okay. Okay. Someone next to you? Or you can say they speak the same language. Anybody else? This is the Arabs' nature. They have to be subdued. This is what they say in the classical works. They cannot be brought by compassion a lot of the times. They must be physically subdued. Especially the Arabs of that time. They only understood the language of power. They had very different tribes. That if you differ between tribes, between each other, that they would do what? They'd go to war. They refuse anything except their own tribe and their lineage. They don't have commonality in religion. They were all mushrikeen, different idols were preferred, and it was a very, very loose form of connection between anything besides your tribe. There was nothing called a central government. There was nothing called one society or one civilization or one culture. It was very, very isolated per tribe, and this had to be brought together by force. Yeah. Well, the people of Salih, their message and their prophet was sent in the old system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used to send to all prophets. Here, this nation, the message is brought to you. If you don't accept it, soon Allah will just punish everyone, and that's what happened. But here it's a different intent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't intend Islam for the Arabs. It was meant for the world. But the Arabs had to be the beginning, the launch pad, as we said. Had to be the cradle of the Islamic civilization. The cradle of Islamic civilization, its start point, its inception, had to be purely Islamic. After that, other nations were conquered. People accept Islam gradually. There's other options that we're going to mention now. This is what happened with the spread of Islamic civilization. It wasn't all exclusively through warfare. Yeah. No, I'm not saying this is why he was sent to the Arabian Peninsula, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm saying this is why this hadith exists, that I'm going to fight them until they accept Islam. The Arabs have no choice. They all must enter into Islam, all the tribes. This Arabian Peninsula must be subjugated. It's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for it to be the cradle of civilization, to be the launch pad for Islam to the rest of the world. And because of the nature of the Arabs, of their religion, of their society, of their culture, nothing else was an option, as we'll see the other nations are given other options, as we're going to come to. Yeah. What's your question? Why they were chosen, there's other reasons that we could get into that the scholars have mentioned, but that's not really what we're doing now. We're mentioning why did the Prophet ﷺ not give them the option? Why is he saying, I was commanded to fight them until they accept Islam? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose the Arabs? There's a bunch of discussions that we could get into maybe another time. Some of them are relevant to what I already mentioned, the fact that they had no central civilization, they had no central leadership. They weren't like the other nations who had governments, who had kings, who had armies that would be more what? It's not easy. When it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not about easier or more difficult. But this was something that the Arabs were known for. So for Islam to come, for example, and to form them into what they became into in 1 or 2 decades is one of the miracles of Islam. That they become now not just people with a government and a civilization and a central religion and a central social structure and a central code of law, but they spread that to the entire world. They become the largest world empire within 30 or 40 years. These are some of the reasons, in addition to the Arabic language, its nature, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose it as the vehicle for the final message, for a lot of its special qualities. But like I said, what we're talking about here now is not why Allah chose the Arabs or Arabia. It's why the commandment was given that I will fight them until they all accept this faith. The only thing that will protect them from that is if they accept it. When that option was clearly not the norm for the spread of Islamic society and civilization afterwards. So this hadith, the explanation for it is that it is specific to the Arabian Peninsula, the mushrikeen around the Prophet ﷺ and around Mecca and Medina, that they would not be given the option that they must come into the fold of Islam. That the system Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using, instead of, if they don't become Muslim in 10, 20, 40, 100 years, a pillar of fire or a flood or an earthquake will take all of them. Instead it's going to be, I'm going to go to war with them one by one. And when you study the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, you will see how that is a more merciful system. Of course it's a more merciful system than if in 40 years they don't accept, they all drown. Right? Because even through this, the majority of them become Muslim and they don't lose anything. In fact, Islam gives them status and wealth and power far beyond what they would have had as individual tribes. And one of the best stories about this is the tribe of Banu Mustaliq. Banu Mustaliq, the Prophet ﷺ goes to war with them. They are taken as captive. Right? They lose and they're taken as captive. And the daughters of one of their chieftains, she comes to him and she says, she's trying to negotiate terms. And then he tells her, instead of that, how about, she's trying to negotiate, her own freedom. She's trying to negotiate her own freedom. She was taken a captive by one of the companions, and she's saying, I want to negotiate my freedom. So he said, how about instead of that, I will marry you, and your freedom will be given. And she agrees to that. And then when that happens, the entire Sahaba say, it doesn't make sense that we're going to have the in-laws of Rasulullah ﷺ as our captives. So they free all of them. They say they're all free. So these people lost a war, and according to the norms of their society and their civilization, what they're used to, that they're going to be captives forever, them and their children, that's it. This is something that is the norms of that society. But now all of a sudden they're all free, just in an instant. So they all become Muslim. So the Sahaba give them back all their property. And they teach them about Islam and they leave. And they're just sitting there like, what just happened? Like, we were attacked, we were taken captive, then we were all freed, then we agreed to this religion after seeing that compassion, then they just left us. Like, why did you come here? They were confused because in their society and their norms of civilization, the only reason to attack another nation is to seize their property, is to subjugate them, is to take control of their lands and their property. None of that happened, and then these people just left us. And now we have this new religion, and we're just back like we were last week, but we're just all Muslim now. So this is what this hadith is talking about. That Islam came, and who was that woman? What was her name? Juwayriyah bint al-Harith, radiallahu anha. So this is what this hadith is talking about. That Islam came and specific instructions that these tribes have no choice. These tribes, instead of receiving a supernatural punishment, war will be waged against them until they accept this faith. And then afterwards, and even then with that, like we said in the very beginning, the context that we started off in the beginning is super important, because the Prophet ﷺ didn't go to war with every single tribe. Despite him saying this hadith that this is the instruction, there was other options given where people became Muslim through other options, where peace treaties were had and other political negotiations were reached. So this is when it comes to the explanation of this hadith, that it's, as the majority of scholars have said, it's specific to the Arab tribes. What about all others now? Is it the same concept? That it starts off with the Arab, but it's the same rules for the whole world? The scholars differed here now. There's actually a difference of opinion. Some of them said, yeah, it's the same ruling, that everybody must be brought into the fold of Islam in the same fashion, or at the very least that they accept Islamic governance. So they, at the very least, they accept Islam as a system of governance. And we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. And others say no, that the options are what the Prophet ﷺ presented after the Arabs, after the Arab tribes. When he came to Yemen, for example, that's considered outside of the Jazirat al-Arab, where there's different nations and different systems, where they had a government, where they had kings, where they had a central religion for the most part. When he gets there now, he sends Mu'adh ibn Jabal, and he tells them, invite them to Islam. It's a verbal invitation. It's da'wah. And for those that refuse, because Islam is under the Islamic governance now, what option do they have? Jizya. They pay jizya, which is a tax that they pay in exchange for the protection, the political, being involved in the political system, that they're constituents of this nation of some sort, even if not on the same level as a Muslim. And they pay jizya, and then they're safe. So that's an option that they're given. They either convert or they pay jizya, and no warfare was done against them. Another nation now, it's three options. It's jizya, it's accepting Islam always first, or jizya, or warfare. So the scholars mentioned that these were different options given to different people at different times, depending on a whole set of other factors that we're not going to get into. And still other scholars also mentioned all throughout Islamic history that besides these, so some scholars said that this is the same rule for all nations. If they don't accept Islam or its governance, warfare is done. And some said no, they're given these three options. They can accept Islam, they can have a back and forth to see if they'll accept it. They can pay the jizya and they'll enter into the Islamic political, geographical boundaries, or they're let be, or warfare is done against them. That's the second opinion. Another opinion that says, while these are the default options, these three, Islam, jizya, or warfare, peace treaties, cessation of conflict, and any other type of political resolution is always preferred. That Islam did not come to go to war with all nations, as it being its default. But as many of the scholars have mentioned, that the impetus for jihad, the driving force behind it, is not disbelief. It's not that these people are disbelievers, so they must be brought into the fold of Islam by force, but the impetus for jihad is actually tyranny and oppression. That a nation could be a disbelieving nation, and they have, we're not going to get into all the proofs and the different hadith, because then it's going to be a very long discussion. But if you're interested in it, it's definitely something that you could check out and read through different texts. But they said that the impetus becomes tyranny and oppression, especially when it's on a systemic level. If it's on a level of it being the system of society, like very good examples are the Persians and the Romans, that a certain class is the ruling class, that on a social, financial, political, religious level, everyone's being oppressed, and that the ruling class, they're not going to get up one day and say, you know what, we're okay with not oppressing anymore. Has that ever happened throughout history? It never happens, even with Islamic countries, right? No one ever says, you know what, I'm tired of oppression, I'm tired of being bad, I want to be good today. That never happens, especially with the ruling class, with people who command armies, who command economies. They must be brought to justice with warfare. This is the Islamic concept. This is all done under, of course, the political organization of an Islamic government, and with a bunch of other factors that, again, are beyond the scope of what we're discussing here. So in this explanation of the hadith, they mention that there's other options, number one, besides warfare. Warfare was the only option, either Islam or warfare, for the Arabs. And then after that, there's clearly from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ other options. Jizya, political diplomacy, treaties. That's very evident in his own ﷺ life. And then specifically more so, because they'll say, oh, he only interacted with the Arabs for the most part. But then the Khulafa that came after him. For the next 100 years, they clearly didn't go to war with everybody. There was cessation of conflicts, there was peace treaties, and da'wah continued in several different ways through trade and whatnot. And they continued to wage jihad all throughout Islamic history, and at times it was justified and at times it wasn't. Right? Especially after the first 100 years, if not less, the leadership shifted away from purely following the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. Slowly at first, and then more so later, especially in the 2nd century onwards, that's it. It's not that it's not Islamic at all, but there's plenty of holes that you can pick and notice with every single ruler, with every single general. Sometimes they're following Islamic law and following the Islamic teachings, and sometimes they weren't. But when you follow the trail of scholarship, you'll see that these options were chosen or preferred depending on the context of the ummah at the time and who they were facing. So it's something that is left up to political analysis, even religious analysis, based on cost and benefit, what helps the ummah, what harms the ummah, what helps others, what harms others, and the Islamic duty to lift oppression wherever it may be worldwide, even if that's by force. So a lot of times people will attack this and say, why warfare at all? But that's a dumb question. I know I always say there's no dumb questions, but there's some dumb questions. And this is one of them. Nobody disagrees on the use of force, even a pacifist. Every pacifist is a liar. How can you prove that? Slap him in the face. Watch what happens. They're not going to say, hey, that's out of line, and let's sit at a table and get diplomatic about it. They're gonna get angry at you and try to slap you back. You take their property. If they're super zen about it and they're really got it down, like they're stoics, and they say, I don't care if you slap me, I'm good, then try to take their property. Try to harm their family. I'm not saying try to do, I'm saying this is an experiment to prove that there's no such thing as real pacifism. So all humanity, all governments agree that pacifism as a way of life makes no sense. So it's not about is using force or not okay as a principle, it's about when is the use of force justified. That's number one. Number two is what is the conduct of that force? When do you use force and how? It's not about should you use force or not. It's about when should you use force and how. And this is something that all humanity has agreed on. It's not something that Islam is particular to. And if you study, not the political history, because there's the people are people at the end of the day, but if you study the Islamic rubrics for when to use force and how, there's not a single nation or religion or text or civilization that will match what Islam has to say. It blows everything else out of the water in how to use when to use force and how. In the strict rules, in the code of conduct of war, and nothing else in history, whether an individual or an idea or a nation, can stand up to it. In terms of its mercy, in terms of its hesitancy to shed blood, and this next hadith is a proof of that. Any questions about this hadith before we move to number 14? Talk about use of force. Going once before we move on to the next one. Feel free to ask anything. Yeah, Adam. So its application is in the hands of the Islamic authority, meaning the Islamic government, Islamic ruler, Islamic army, which doesn't exist today. There's no Islamic government, there's no Islamic leadership, there's no Muslim army in the sense that Islam is its value. Right? This doesn't exist today at all. So it's something that is left up to, it's applied from the top down. It's not something that individuals have any application of. Why are we delving into it? Because this is a class called Hadith for Everyday Living, and you need to know how to understand it because it's a question that you may receive. It's a qualm that many Muslims themselves will have. Like, how do I understand this? This isn't okay. This isn't, what I was taught that Islam was. So no, the problem is in your understanding, your limited exposure to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, your limited exposure to Islamic history and how the Islamic scholarship understood and implemented this hadith all throughout history. Again, we're not backtracking or trying to fix it to appease ourselves or others. This is something that you can open up. Ibn Rajab, a medieval Islamic scholar, you could go even further back to older explanations, and you'll find all the same things here. That's the sources I used to put this together. This isn't some kind of like apologetic answer that is trying to do away with our actual tradition and try to make it a way that fits today. No, this is the classic interpretations, and like I was saying, like to answer your question, is not something that the Muslim individual applies whatsoever. In addition to this next hadith, it has nothing to do with the Muslim individual's application except in adhering to the warning and taking it seriously with the hadith we're going to speak about next. But its application is not something that the Muslim individual ever does on their own. It's something that for the Islamic government, the ruler, the qadi, to do in times where it's justified and when he has the authority and the power to do so. Because the next hadith is about capital punishment. Any other questions about 8 before we move to 14? We are doing 9 and 10. It's just that 8 is, the Prophet ﷺ said, I was commanded to fight the people until they say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, they pray salah, they give zakah, and if they do that, their wealth and their blood is protected from me except by the right of Islam. Meaning even if they say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, they pray salah, they give zakah, I can still take their life. Their blood is not protected in the rule of Islam. What does that mean? Hadith number 14 explains it. What is the exception of the sanctity of Muslim blood? Hadith number 14 is telling us the exception of that sentence where he says if they become Muslim basically, their wealth and their person is protected. It cannot be harmed except under the rules of Islam. So meaning it's still a possibility. What is that possibility? That's what hadith number 14 tells us. Who wants to read it for us? Somebody. Go ahead, sister. Jazakallah khairan. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, someone read the English on this side. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, not a very good translation, but it's okay. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, we spoke about Abdullah ibn Mas'ud in the previous hadith. Someone tell me something about Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So we're not going to redo his short biography that we did, but it's good to know a little bit about each narrator. So tell me just one thing about him. No, he's not one of the 10. But he was probably promised Jannah. One of who? No, he's not one of the 4 Abdullahs. The 4 Abdullahs are Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Amr, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, and Abdullah ibn Umar, Amr, Zubayr. Hey, I got 75%. I don't know why you're laughing. Who's the 4th one? Abdullah ibn Abbas. I just needed a few more seconds. Could have got it. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is not one of them. Something about him, yes. Jazakallah khairan. He said, whoever wants to read the Quran fresh and soft as it has been revealed, meaning it's pure as it exactly should be read, should recite it it should be taught by Ibn Abd, which is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. He's one of the first to accept Islam. He said, I was number 6 out of 6. Meaning when I became Muslim, there was only 5 other Muslims. So he's one of the first Muslims. Anything else? So he was very thin. He had a very small stature. So he was climbing a tree once, and the wind blew, and his shins were showing. So people started to laugh at him, like, look at how skinny he is. Look how small his shins are. They made fun of his stature. So the Prophet ﷺ rebuked them. He said, you're making fun of them, while I swear that one of them is heavier than the mountain of Uhud in Jannah. Like his physical stature is a joke to you, but he weighs a lot more than you. Right? This is not something to laugh at. So good. This is what he said about Abdullah Mas'ud in addition to plenty of other hadith. They mentioned he was the first person to recite Quran in public in Mecca besides Rasulullah ﷺ. So the Sahaba are sitting together, and he comes to them, and they're discussing that we want to recite Quran in public. We want people to hear this message the same way that Rasulullah does. So he says, I'll do it. And I say, hold up. You're small, like you're physically small, and also you're an outsider. Right? He was not originally Meccan. His father came to Mecca. He earned the protection of the tribe, and they kind of just adopted him. But you're not part of any tribe originally. And just like with many other nations and systems, that they'll accept you until they don't, till they can find a reason not to. So while this tribe technically gives you protection, you're not really part of them, and that might, if they see you reading Quran, they'll hurt you. So he says, I don't care, not afraid. And he goes to a group of them and he starts reciting Surah Al-Rahman. And exactly what they feared happened. They pounce on him, they beat him to a pulp until there's marks all over his face. And when he comes back to the Sahaba, they say, we told you so. This is what we were afraid of. We didn't want this to happen to you. And he said, if you want, I'll go back tomorrow. I'm going to go do the same thing tomorrow. They said, no, relax. Like, it's okay. They had to convince him not to, because he said, this doesn't matter to me. He said, there was no moment where the enemies of Allah were lighter in front of me, were easy to face than that moment when I was reciting Quran. Doesn't matter what you see here, what they did to me. There was no moment where I saw them as more insignificant. I was less afraid of them than when I was standing in front of them reciting Quran. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him and his mother. The earlier Sahaba said as well that from the amount that him and his mother would enter into the house of Rasulullah ﷺ, we thought they were part of his family. So they were constantly in the presence of Rasulullah ﷺ and his wives and learning from them. So anyway, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يحل دم امرئ مسلم. The blood of a Muslim is never allowed to be spilled. Is never halal to be spilled. And this is where the hadith starts. It's important. They're coming from a society where blood is being spilled left and right. Where if you have the tribe for it, you can spill anyone's blood and face very little repercussions, if any at all. And in fact, that is a very, very common theme across the world at the time. So it's actually limiting the amount of blood that can be spilled. It's not allowing it. It's not a permission. It is something that's limiting it. Like there's no time where Muslim blood can be spilled, where someone can be physically attacked, except in these strict conditions. So that's number one. The sanctity of life is what this hadith is titled by Imam Nawawi. حُرْمَةْ دَمِ الْمُسْلِمِ وَمَتَى تُهْدَرْ. The sanctity of Muslim blood, when is it allowed to be violated? But the primary point of the hadith is to show the sanctity of blood. And this is something the Prophet ﷺ said when he was doing Hajjat al-Wada' in the last few months of his life, the only Hajj that he made, where he's addressing a crowd larger than he had ever seen before and never that he will see again. The things that he started with in that speech is he told them, ﷺ, up to 100,000 companions are listening. He told them, أَيُّ يَوْمٍ هَذَا أَيُّ شَهْرٍ هَذَا أَيُّ بَلَدٍ هَذَا. What day is it? What month are we in? In what land? That's how he starts the speech to 100,000 Muslims, the vast majority of whom are seeing him and meeting him for the very first time in their lives. What day is it today? What month? And where are we? But from their level of commitment and devotion to him, ﷺ, no one answered. No one said it's the day of Arafah, it's Dhul Hijjah, we're in Arafah. Like what kind of question is this? They all stayed quiet. And they said, قَدْ يُسَمِّهِ بِغَيْرِ اسْمِهِ. Maybe, they later explained that we said to ourselves, maybe he's going to change the name. That's why he's asking such an obvious question. And their level of devotion and sincere obedience to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ was so strong that if he said today is no longer called the day of Arafah, this month is no longer called Dhul Hijjah, these lands have a new name, they would have said done. He changed people's names, said that name is not an appropriate name, doesn't have a good meaning. They said done. That is how much devotion they had to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And you compare that to today where people hear a hadith and they say, well, do I have to do it? Is it sunnah or is it just a recommendation or is it fard? That's the first thing that they respond with. And this is something that we'll talk about in hadith number 9, I believe, or 10, which is the importance of accepting the Messenger of Allah ﷺ and what he says and what he teaches. But he didn't change the name of anything. That wasn't the purpose of that question. He asked them, is it not the day of Arafah? They said, yes, it is. Is it not the month of Dhul Hijjah? They said, yes, it is. Are these not the sacred lands of Arafah and Mina and Muzdalifah? Because he gave the speech in multiple places. And they said, yes, they are. They're holy lands. They're sacred places. So his objective was not to change the name. His objective was instead to highlight the level of sanctity that we're surrounded by as we do these things in these special times and these special places. Why is he highlighting the sanctity? Because then he told them, إِنَّ دِمَاءَكُمْ وَأَمْوَالَكُمْ وَأَعْرَاضَكُمْ حَرَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ كَحُرْمَةِ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا فِي شَهْرِكُمْ هَذَا فِي بَلَدِكُمْ هَذَا. Your blood and your wealth and your honor is inviolable, can never be violated. The same way that this day cannot be violated in this month in these lands. When somebody is crossing several red lines, it's a bigger deal. Somebody sins, it's a sin. It's not okay. But what if they sin in the daytime in Ramadan? Or in the months, the sacred months. What are the sacred months? The 4 sacred months. Muharram, Dhul Hijjah. Ramadan is not one of them. Dhul Qa'dah, Rajab. So it's Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram, and Rajab. These are the 4 sacred months where violations are worth more in sin and good deeds are more in reward. 3 of them are Hajj months, and Rajab is by itself. As some of the scholars have said, it's in preparation of Ramadan amongst other reasons. And there's some other special rules for these months. But the point is, he's telling them, you recognize, and this is something they recognized before Islam, that these months were sacred even before he came ﷺ with the message. It's from the time of Ibrahim ﷺ. You recognize that if you sin in this time, in this place, it's increased, right? Someone curses here, you say, relax, it's in the masjid. Not that it's okay to curse outside of it, but you're violating this space. So he says, you guys recognize that there could be red lines. That's the Muslim. They're surrounded by red lines. More sacred than this day, in this month, in this place. Imagine someone who's walking around Arafah while everyone's making dua and making hajj, and they're just like beating people up. Or it's like how clueless and insensitive you have to be to the level of violations that you're incurring here. You're not just harming a fellow Muslim, but in ihram, in the day of Arafah, at Arafah itself, like, what are you doing? So he's saying, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you guys recognize several red lines. They're surrounding the Muslim in their wealth, in their honor, and in their blood. In another hadith, he said, لَزَوَالُ الدُّنْيَا أَهْوَنُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ مِنْ قَتْلِ مُؤْمِنٍ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ. For the whole dunya to collapse, the cessation of this world as it exists, is less of a deal to Allah than the killing of a single Muslim without due right. He said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that sabbul muslimi fisk, for you to curse a Muslim is a sign of rebellious disobedience against your Creator. You're a bad person to curse a fellow Muslim. وَقِتَالُهُ كُفْرٌ, and to physically fight him is an act of disbelief. You're right there. You're almost a disbeliever by committing violence against your fellow Muslim. So these are very, very strong ahadith that show us the sanctity of Muslim life. And it begs the question that what if he could see our ummah today, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? What would his remarks be in the way that this ummah interacts with one another, not even referencing from outside sources or from enemies, but the way that it acts amongst each other? Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, he was making tawaf and he looked at the Kaaba and he said, مَا أَعْظَمُكِ مَا حُرْمَتِكِ, how great you have been made, how sacred, such a special place. This is the focal point of our worship, the most sacred place on earth. وَلَحُرْمَةُ الْمُؤْمِنِ أَعْظَمُ مِنْكَ, but the sanctity of a Muslim is greater than you. The sanctity of a single Muslim is greater than the sanctity of the Kaaba. This is what Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu is saying. Radiallahu anhuma. So who designates this sanctity? Who made these things special? It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one who decides sanctity. He's Al-Quddus, which means the perfect, the free from all blemishes, the free from all false attributions of children or spouses or associates. And it also means the owner of all qadasa, which is sanctity, purity. He's the one who decides that this is muqaddas, this is holy. So he's the one who hands it out. He's the one who decides what's sacred and what's not. And likewise, he can designate when that sanctity could be violated. He's the one who could say, you're sacred, this is important until now. This is what violates that sanctity or breaks that rule. Makes sense? Everyone's following along? Just nod your head and make me feel better. So, he said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala obviously decided, that this is the norm, it's always sacred, it's always inviolable, Muslim blood, except in 3 situations. Al-Thayyib al-Zani, وَالنَّفْسُ بِالنَّفْسِ وَالتَّارِكُ لِدِينِهِ الْمُفَارِقُ لِلْجَمَاعَةِ. Let's go through all 3 of them very quickly. So the first one is al-Thayyib al-Zani. So the reason I said that's a bad translation, Yusuf, is because you said the one who's married. It doesn't have to be married. Al-Thayyib doesn't mean the one who is married. What is a Thayyib? Anyone? Huh? No? No? Good guess though. That if it doesn't mean married, it must be single. No, it doesn't mean either. First, let's start with a zani. The one who commits illegal sexual intercourse. That's what zina is. Because adultery could have different connotations depending on the context, but illegal sexual intercourse. That's what zina is. Can have different kinds, but that's what it generally is, right? It's sexual intercourse between two people who are not allowed to have sexual intercourse together. And then a thayyib. So it's not just any zina, it's someone who is thayyib. Thayyib is someone who previously had legal sexual intercourse. How's that different than the person who's married? Because the person could get married, they had legal sexual intercourse with their spouse, but then now they're divorced. So now they're unmarried. So it doesn't mean the married fornicator, because that's not what it means at all. What it means is the person who previously engaged in legal sexual intercourse, legal meaning according to Islam, right? We're not talking about other laws. So someone who had previously had legal sexual intercourse now commits zina. Wal'ayadhu billah. The punishment for that is it's a capital crime. It's capital punishment in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Do not even come close to zina. And through this verse and of course the teachings of our Prophet ﷺ, that's how they arrive to this, the two genders can't physically touch one another. They can't be alone together. All these things is not because they're zina, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't forbid zina the way He forbid other things. He said, don't even come close to it. So these barriers were made haram as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, He created for us a need for food and drink, and He divided food and drink into halal and haram. And He created us as a society and even as individuals that people need sexual intercourse, and likewise He divided it into halal and haram. He's the one again who decides this sanctity and makes these rules. So the person who had previously engaged in legal sexual intercourse now commits zina, then the punishment for it's a capital crime, it's capital punishment, it's execution. Someone who did not have previous legal sexual intercourse, what's the punishment for that? 100 lashes and? No, they don't have to free a slave. What's the punishment? Flogging and? Exile. They have to be exiled for a year. They get exiled for a year. So this is their town, you must leave it. Go some other town for a year. Next is, so first before we go next, someone might hear this and say this is absurd, right? This is something that is barbaric. You can go around killing people. First of all, it's not how it works at all. For this punishment to occur, what is needed? Huh? 3 witnesses will get lashed. 4 witnesses. What do these witnesses have to do? Yeah, they have to witness penetration. And they cannot use any euphemisms. They can't say it in a nice way. They have to say the sentence. So I'll give you an example that you'll find in Islamic law. One of the most fascinating things about all these punishments is when you actually study Islamic law and you see the insane amount of details that our Sharia goes through before implementing something like this. So you have person A, person B, person C, person D. And they all say person X and person Y committed zina. They all say the same thing. They can't say committed zina, by the way. According to many scholars, they can't say we saw these two commit zina. They have to say the sentence. I'm going to spare you the details to keep it PG-13, but they have to say it in that detail. So person A says it, person B says it, person C says it, and person D says it, and they both name both people. They're cross-examined. Each one's taken separately. And they're asked, they're pressed for details. If there's one difference in any story, all 4 of them are lashed. And nothing happens to the 2 people they accused. Any difference in the testimony. Your story doesn't match the other 3.
Even if I say, for example, one of the brothers was wearing a black shirt and the other witnesses they were wearing a blue shirt?
Just like that. A detail like that puts enough doubt on the situation. All 4 of these individuals get lashed publicly and their testimony is never accepted again for their entire lives. There's one story in the time of Umar where everybody has the same story. And if you read it in the Islamic fiqh books, when I was in class, I couldn't believe this is an Islamic fiqh book. Like, it's an insane amount of detail that would make anybody uncomfortable or blush if they have any hayat. But this is what they're forced to say. If someone's about to be executed. This isn't a game. You're about to cause someone to go through capital punishment. So the amount of detail that all four of them mention is, like, I wouldn't even say it here or anywhere, to be honest. You can look it up if you want, or just don't. Take my word for it. And everything checks out. Everything is the same exact story, except for one detail. Everybody agrees on who this is. And these three agree on who she is. This one says, she could have been the one that they said, but I'm not 100% sure. That's the only difference. And it goes through each of their testimony one by one. And he just says, she could be her, but I'm not 100% sure. The case gets thrown out and they all get lashed. Umar ibn al-Khattab goes to this person and he says, listen, I don't want you're a companion of the Prophet. He's a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, one of them. He says, you're a companion. The others are not. I don't want this to be your legacy, that you are considered untrustworthy for the rest of your life. Rescind your testimony, cancel the whole case, and everyone goes home. This guy says, over my dead body. Long story. We don't need to get into it now. But he insists. He says, I refuse. Sorry, not this guy. This guy, the one who brought the case. He says, your boy here, D, he's not 100% sure about her. Everything else matches. The case gets thrown out. You get lashed for bringing the case to Islamic court and tarnishing people's honor. Because people talk. So I don't want that to happen to you. You're someone who's a companion and I'd rather not. So throw out your case as the person who brought it to the court. This guy says, over my dead body. There's a lot going on here. That's not relevant. So Umar says, okay. They get lashed and their testimony is rejected for the rest of their lives. So if you have four people who can agree on all of this detail, then, those people will probably committing zina in the supermarket. Like, it's not going to be something that can be easily witnessed. What happens if you have three people? Same thing, right? Two people. Doesn't matter. If you don't have all four of them and they're not cross-examined in this fashion, the capital punishment for zina is not implemented. It's either this or confession. Confession takes the place of this. Yeah. What about for the lashing?
What I'm saying is that, let's say, without a fourth one, there's three, and they all same thing, say everything. What happens to the court?
What do you mean? I don't understand. I don't understand your question.
So, for example, A, B, and C, testimony and everything, what happens?
They get lashed, all three of them.
No, they have the same testimony.
They all get lashed. Don't come to the court unless you have four people with the same exact, if you're ready to, it's 100% or nothing. There's no 99.9. You have three people and they all come separately even. They didn't come together so that they thought it together. They all come separately and they have the same exact story. Where's your fourth man to bring this to court? It's insufficient to come to court to put the other two to trial, the man and the woman that you're accusing. Now you're on trial for bringing a case to Islamic court that doesn't have enough evidence. Individuals can raise it. At that time, no. And no, sorry, not at that time. Islam never, so that's the next thing, thank you for bringing it up, that Islam never mandates this. The default is everyone minds your business. What happens behind closed doors between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People came to Rasulullah they came to Rasulullah and forget this whole system, they admitted it. Right? We have two people, two stories that the two times the Prophet stoned people. One of them was, who are they? No. The two people that he stoned for zina, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Who were they? It's Ma'iz, the companion's name was Ma'iz, and then the woman from the Ghamidi tribe, she's known as Al-Ghamidiyya. So Ma'iz comes to him first, and he says, oh, Rasulullah, I've committed zina. The Prophet ﷺ ignores him. Then he says it 3 different times. Each time the Prophet ﷺ ignores him and tells him, go repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, get out of here. And when he says it the 4th time, the Prophet ﷺ now turns to everyone else and he asks, is he okay? Can anybody testify that he's not okay? Can someone tell me there's something wrong with him? He says nonsense sometimes, he lost his mind, he drank alcohol. Someone give me something. And they all say, he's perfectly fine. So he insists and he refuses to leave until the Prophet ﷺ carries on the stoning and he's executed. And in the second story, some short time later, Al-Ghamidiyya comes to him and she does the same thing, and each time he turns away from her and he says, go repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not my job to police you. It's not my job to find out what you did behind closed doors. No witnesses, khalas, you make tawbah. That's the default. Islam doesn't come to go on a witch hunt for any of these things, any of these punishments that we're describing. On the fourth time, she tells him, don't do to me what you did to Ma'az. Don't try to send me away. I'm not leaving. So, and then she's pregnant. So he tells her, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, go until you deliver. So she leaves. She comes back with an infant now, 9 months later. And he tells her, leave until he is weaned. He can eat solid food. How long does that take? 2 years. So you're talking about almost 3 years later. She comes back and she has the boy eating a piece of bread to show that he can now eat physical food. The boy is given to his relatives, their relatives, and the punishment is carried out. And one of the companions expresses disgust. And the Prophet ﷺ tells him, don't you dare. Because if her tawbah was split amongst the people of Medina, all the households, it would have sufficed to forgive all of their sins. This is not someone that you rebuke or that we're looking down on. She's a hero. As was Ma'az. In the funeral of Ma'az, the Prophet ﷺ was walking on his tiptoes. They told him, why are you doing that? He says, because the angels are in this procession. They are following this procession to honor this man who came and sought expiation for his sin. Same thing for Al-Ghamidiyya when they did not have to. So the scholars highlight a couple of things about these two hadith. What do you notice about these two punishments that are carried out? What's missing here? The 4 witnesses are missing because they confessed. So there's no need for 4 witnesses. There's something else crazy that's missing here. Huh? The other partner. Takes 2 to tango. Who did he commit zina with? Who did she commit zina with? It's not asked. We don't go after it. Islam has not come to go on a witch hunt. You come in to confess zina. You didn't commit zina by yourself. Where's the other party? It's not asked at all. Prophet ﷺ doesn't ask it. Doesn't ask them, well, guys, we're doing half a court case. It's left alone. These are the people who are coming to confess because they wanted to purify themselves. Another thing is that he sent them away both 4 times or 3 times. And some scholars say that the person, when they come to confess, they must say it 4 times, and that takes the place of the 4 witnesses. What does that mean? What does that mean if they have to say it 4 times? You don't have to say the same exact thing, but you're on the right track. You could rescind your confession. If after the 3rd time they said, you know what, Rasulullah, never mind. That's it. That would be over. So without the 4 witnesses, even someone who confesses, they have the ability to rescind their confession. Say, I'm going to make tawbah to Allah, never mind. I cancel this. So and this is something that I was going to get to at the end, but we jumped to it here, which is that the Sharia has a preference for absolving people from capital punishment specifically. This is a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, any type of doubt, like what you said, someone doesn't match the details, a color is off. They all the people who are claimed to be witnesses, even if they're telling the truth, that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Sharia is not rushing, Islam's not rushing to execute people. These are deterrents to show us the gravity of the sin and to do something else that we'll get to at the end. But let's wrap this up very quickly. What's number 2 now? The second sin, or the second capital punishment? No, that's the 3rd. An-nafs bin-nafs. A soul for a soul. So there's 3 types of killing. 3 types of killing another soul. What are they? So by accident, al-khata'. That means the last one's going to be what? On purpose. Good job, guys. It's a long day, so we won't take too long. We're almost done. And then what's in between by accident and by purpose? Some scholars say there's only by accident and by purpose, and some there's a middle ground, which is what? So self-defense is not a crime. Self-defense is not a crime. You kill someone in self-defense Islamically, this doesn't apply here. Passion, anger, all these things might result in what? They'll call it shibh al-amd, which is like semi on purpose. Somebody gets in a fight with somebody, and they just look around, there's a broomstick, and they slam it on their head. And that person dies. Did they intend to kill them? Maybe. We don't know, but we don't know. Somebody pulls out a gun, aims at someone's face and shoots them and say, no, I just want to injure them. No, that's not how it works. That was a purposeful killing, right? So this is the Sharia differentiated this, and this is all based on the hadith that we're skipping for the sake of time, because they're all treated differently. When someone kills on accident, they don't get executed. There's no capital punishment for that. Meaning I'm like lifting up a giant rock or something, or a chair, someone's downstairs, it falls and it kills them. I don't know, it's a long day. Huh? I'm lifting a large chair upstairs and it falls down the stairs and kills somebody. It was an accident. Why are you thinking so bad of me? Why would I do that on purpose? I'm reversing my car and then someone's behind me and I run them over. It's an accident, isn't it? No? Why are you so cynical? Yeah. So that's an accident. No. Did you want to kill somebody? Do you text and say like, I want to kill somebody today, so I'm just gonna like text till I run someone over? Yeah. So I'm a negligent, I'm sinful for that negligence, but I can't be executed for it. No. Semi is defined as an intent to injure, but not to kill. So I take this marker and I chuck it at you in anger. But my aim is really, really good and it hits you on like some nerve that stops your heart. So the Sharia would describe it, some scholars described it as where the intention is not clear. There's no clear intention, one. And more importantly, the means and the tools and the situation is not where people normally die. So me and you get into a fight, we kind of push each other, and then you fall and die. Is that something that normally happens? No, it's not. Nowadays, not really. Like if me and you got in a little bit of tussle here, and then like one of us knocked the other over and he fell in a weird way where his neck cracked and he's dead. That doesn't normally happen. Okay, let me fix this then. I throw the marker at you. Let's go back to that example. And you die from it, God forbid. Does that normally happen where if you chuck the marker at somebody and it hits them, no matter how hard, it kills? No. So that's what they will call it, that it's not exactly on purpose, but it's not exactly an accident either, because I meant to injure you. That's why they won't put it in accident. And other scholars, like the Maliki scholars, they say, well, that's an accident anyway. Like you meant to injure, so you're sinful for that, but it's not murder. Murder is only this on purpose, which means the tools or the means or the context showed that murder was the intent. What's the context here? Two witnesses. That they'll say some kind of statement that this person, before he did this, he said this or he was planning it, something like that. Yeah. You good? All right. That's for the third. So if somebody whacks somebody on the head with a broomstick and they die, scholars will put it here. So for these two, there's no capital punishment in most cases. They'll have to pay the diya, which is 100 camels, and they'll have to fast 2 months straight. That's the expiation for these two sins, accidental murder. Killing on purpose now, then the family gets to choose. The family of the victim, say again, brother? The murdered one, yeah, the family of the murdered one. The family of the victim will get to choose. No, we want a life for a life. This person must be executed for killing our loved one. Or we'll take the blood money, or we'll forgive. It's up to them. Yeah. No. This is a right that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them. There's no sin on them for choosing to take the life. This is their right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them the right to choose a life for a life. And He encouraged forgiveness. He encouraged leniency. But He knows human nature. And He gave it that right. And not just He knows human nature, that some people will never be satisfied, but He decreed that a life for a life. You know, this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ruled. Again, the sanctity of life is given by Him, and He decides when it doesn't apply. The last thing that is apostasy. التارك لدينه المفارق للجماعة. So this also has a longer discussion that we won't get into, but it's worth noting a couple of things. Number one is that they differed on the details of when does the person become abandoning their religion? First of all, the context. In the time that the Prophet ﷺ came with this, and for centuries thereafter. In fact, for the majority of human history, specifically in the Muslim Ummah, your deen was not just a personal commitment that you have. This was your citizenship. This is your citizenship to the nation of Muslims. It's through your deen. There's no process where you apply for citizenship. Once you're a Muslim citizen. You're a nation. You're protected by this nation. You have the same dues like zakah, if the ruler calls for jihad, if anything that applies to Muslims applies to you automatically. So for you to denounce that is like denouncing your citizenship. And even till today, there's high treason laws. What is the punishment for high treason in America? It's execution, not jail. No, high treason is punished by execution in America and in most nations. If you betray the nation, you are executed. This is the law until today. So the Islamic religion is not a concept or a component of society that's delegated to the masajid. It exists in every facet of society. You have certain rights and certain dues. So to denounce that citizenship, to renounce that designation is not optional. But how would anybody know? How would anybody know that you no longer identify as Muslim? Is that you announce it. If you just quietly, God forbid, not you, somebody, they quietly in themselves says, I don't believe in this anymore. They stopped doing all the religious Islamic injunctions. They couldn't care less. They eat pork in private and they drink alcohol in Ramadan and they're at home. There's nothing that is done. There's no witch hunt. There's no like, hey, every year the Muslims got to take a citizenship test where you recite Quran and show how to pray. No one ever did that. It is a personal choice on a personal level. But once it gets to the outside now, Islam protects its citizens. It's about protection of the others. And there's a whole judicial process as well that needs witnesses, that could be dropped with the slightest introduction of doubt, that can be all cancelled out by one statement, which is never mind. The person, they don't have to believe it. They don't have to prove it. No one's saying, I better see you in the masjid next Jum'ah. And that's another thing. It's exclusive to males according to most scholars, or many scholars. That's the male. And this is further into the point that I was speaking about. It's about the citizenship. It's about the role of these people in society, where they're the ones who pay zakah for the most part. They're the ones who wage jihad. And by leaving Islam, it's basically an announcement that I'm on the other side, especially in the society at that time. What do we do now where the case is no longer that, where citizenship and religion are separate things? A lot of the scholars have said it's not as applicable in the same fashion, not because the world has changed today, but again, this is based on scholarship throughout all Islamic history, that they say the details differ about the when and the where and the rest of the context. So some scholars have said, for example, that this person is presented with the Islamic guidance. A scholar is designated to come and speak with them to answer any doubts that they may have. And some say that is done indefinitely until they either agree or not. And some say it's for a limit of 3 days, as Umar radiallahu anhu is narrated from him. And all these cases of capital punishment are dropped with any introduction of the least bit of doubt. Any doubt that is introduced into the case, then it is dropped. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Idra'u al-hudud bish-shubuhat." Push back capital punishment, hudud, with any doubt. Anytime there's a doubt, people could still be punished. Things went wrong and someone was hurt or a crime was committed for sure, but we're doubting the intent or we're doubting the details around it, then what will be removed from the list of possible punishments is capital punishment. They will not be executed. Imam Nawawi put these ahadith together to highlight the fundamentals of Islam. What is the fundamental of Islam here? He's not teaching Islamic law. Islamic penal code is, they did the math with the ayat and the hadith about it. It comes out to about less than 1% of Islamic law and Islamic life. That means the rest of Islam is 99% other stuff. This is a very minuscule and detailed and specific category of Islamic law. That who is the only one concerned with this? It's the judges and the rulers. This doesn't concern the average Muslim in any way, shape, or form except in one category, which is what? Huh? No, because he's not talking about the rulings of witnesses and what they must say. He didn't get into any of that. So it's a deterrent. He's saying these are huge deals, guys. So as a Muslim in your life, stay away from this. Be as far removed from it as possible. That's what the point of this hadith is on the average level for the average Joe or the average Mo. For in terms of all the other details about when do these things apply and what is significant doubt, that you could take an Islamic law class. It's fascinating. The amount of, you would be reading these classical Islamic works where they told you the Muslim society is barbaric and it goes on witch hunts and it kills people left and right for zina, for this. And you'll see pages and pages that to you look like loopholes, look like people who are just trying to avoid the law. But that's because they took this hadith super seriously. So any situation where they can drop capital punishment, the scholars jump on it. They say that the ruler could punish this person, fine them, maybe imprison them for a prison term if they did something wrong. But as soon as there's any doubt introduced to the case, whether it's zina, whether it's killing, whether it's apostasy, then the capital punishment is rescinded and something else takes its place, or nothing at all. In addition to, for apostasy, all the person needs to do to get rid of the capital punishment is to say, no, I take my word, I take it back. Whatever people heard me say or they claimed about me. Like someone's cursing the Prophet ﷺ, for example. Then 2 witnesses come for that. That would be like an apostasy case, for example. All they have to do is say, no, I didn't intend it, or it was an accident, or I didn't know I was saying, I was mad, and that's it. It's done. They won't be, capital punishment won't be done. Yeah. What if what? That's a good question. I don't know. If they do it repeatedly. So, we have, tons of people who apostated in the time of the Sahaba, and even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and they became Muslim again. They was accepted from them. So there's no one worse than Tulayha al-Asadi, right? We spoke about Tulayha. What did he do? He said he was a prophet. While Rasulullah ﷺ was still alive. He's saying, I'm a prophet too. Look, is there worse apostasy than that? But then he becomes Muslim. And he goes and fights in jihad and becomes a shaheed eventually. So these people were always accepted as soon as they dropped their apostasy and became Muslim again. What is the connecting factor between these 3 sins? Al-Thayyib al-Zani, specifically, the one who had previous sexual intercourse, the apostate, and the murderer. They're tearing society apart. These rules, again, are not meant to be a witch hunt against individuals. Specifically, apostasy and zina. There's no force that looks after these things. Murder, maybe. If someone's murdered, they're going to want to come find out who did it. But there's no system in Islamic history that you'll find where people track down apostates or track down people that commit zina. In fact, there were prostitutes that were known in the time of the Sahaba. Even in the time of the Sahaba, after the Rasul ﷺ, even in the Seerah, there's some mention of them that it's known that these people run brothels. But no one's witnessing it. It's just it's an open secret. There's no witch hunt done against them. They're brought to the fold of Islam and the Islamic teaching. Some of them were Muslim through the natural da'wah that everyone else does. But they were known that these women or these areas are brothels and these are prostitutes. But there was no Islamic force that went hunting them. It was just like, this is a bad place to go to, or everyone kind of knows what goes on there in this general area. If it's not the exact place that was pinpointed, that could be shut down. But there's no hunting force that went after these things. Because if you do that as a personal choice, that's on you. You will face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as an individual. This is to protect the society. Because these things tear society to shreds. People taking each other's lives, that's quite obvious. Apostasy, because Islamic society doesn't come to succeed and to eat and to drink and to have homes. These are all secondary or tertiary goals for what Islam came to do. It came to build their faith and take them from this world to the hereafter in the most successful fashion within the correct purpose as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designated. So this is going to tear society apart. And then zina, specifically for someone who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed the opportunity to do it in a halal fashion. Now by insisting on the haram, they're going to tear society apart. They're going to tear families apart. They're going to ruin the trust, ruin the families, ruin the very fabric of society at its core. So these were rules meant to protect the Muslim society. Go ahead, Daz. Yeah, that's true.
I heard that there was a person way past the time Rasulullah sallallahu where he was a mu'adhin. Is that
He was where?
he was a mu'adhin. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mu'adhin.
That maybe adhan and to marry a Christian girl, he converted to Christianity
Yeah.
in an Islamic city. And then I heard another one where during the time of the Khalifas, not the four, that there was a village that decided to revert to paganism from Islam. So in all those times they committed apostasy, but they weren't killed. So my question is that when does it add to the level of does capital punishment happen? Would they go to another? Would they become soldiers of another army, or how would it work?
So that's something the scholars mentioned. At what point does it become a capital punishment? The shortest answer, because this is like case by case, we'll have to look at these cases in their details. I don't have them here. But the shortest answer is when it comes to the judge, when this person is brought before the judge. It's not something that vigilantes could do, me and you. Or even in a Muslim society that exists where this is the law. Individuals have nothing to do with it. It's the government that applies these things. So if these people were not brought before a magistrate or not brought before a due process in court, they would just go on with their lives, whether they're Muslim or not.
So then my question is that if a person that leaves Islam or the village comes before a judge, the judge has the right to decide the capital punishment or just for them to pay the jizya?
So no, they can't pay the jizya. Jizya is not an option. They can't revert back from Islam and then pay the jizya. But the details differ where some scholars mentioned they're given 3 days where an Islamic scholar is to sit with them, answer their grievances, answer their questions. And those 3 days is the time that they have to make that decision. And some said that's more than 3 days. It could be prolonged indefinitely, particularly in the case of women. So some scholars have said, for example, that for the case of women, they are never to be executed in the case of apostasy, that they are just given this istitaba, which is this opportunity to repent indefinitely. These things have different opinions, more of like a fiqh class kind of thing that we're not doing here, but the details are not homogeneous, like they differ from case to case.
So there's no clear-cut answer.
To what? What's the question?
So at what point does the line become clear that if they become apostate, they have to be capital punished?
So the general answer is what I mentioned. That's the general answer. There's an asterisk there. It needs more details, but that's the general answer. When it's brought before a court, there's 2 witnesses to this person's apostasy, that they're no longer a Muslim, or said statements to that effect. And the judge questions them. Someone is brought to speak to them for 3 days. If they refuse after those 3 days, then the capital punishment is implemented in an Islamic system when all the context fits. That's the general answer. Does that have an asterisk next to it? That's what I'm telling you, it does. To explore that asterisk, we'll have to take a class on hudud, which is Islamic capital punishment, and we'll go through all these different narrations, all the different madhahib, and make a conclusion in that fashion. It's a very advanced level of discourse.
The reason why I'm asking this question is because I did hear of a case of a village going from Islam to paganism, and they were just told to pay the jizya.
Maybe, I don't know. So it's possible that for one reason or the other, this was the scholarly fatwa given at the time and the political advice that was followed. I can't speak to it and I don't know.
So then it's for apostasy, it's capital punishment with an asterisk.
For all 3 of them. Or that's what the whole point of this explanation was, that for all 3 of them there's asterisks. It's not that simple. Oh, yeah. Any questions, sisters? Yeah, Dunya. Yeah. I knew this was coming. No, rape is different than zina. Rape is, in Islamic law, there's nothing called rape, right? Rape is not a separate crime. It's 2 crimes, al-i'tida and zina. So the scholars would have differed over some of the details in terms of the crime, just because zina has its own requirement of 4 witnesses, but because it's, the other one, which is al-i'tida, aggression against somebody, whether with a weapon or not. With a weapon, it becomes hiraba, which is an even more severe sin. You only need 2 witnesses. So because of that, there's some difference of opinion there when rape is included. But in any case, al-hiraba, which is aggression with a weapon, that's also another crime that's a capital punishment. So that's something that I skipped over here just because we don't really need it, but these aren't the only 3 crimes that get capital punishment in Islam. And there's a whole difference of opinion over it just because these are mentioned together, and there's a whole explanation there. But we know that there's others that warrant execution as well in Islamic law. And in that case, it's going to be, there is a difference of opinion over it because of it's a crime that's composed of more than one crime. So one of them needs 2 witnesses, one of them needs 4, but the whole general situation, like that's something that we can explore another time. Now, in terms of the camera, again, some scholars differed over it because they said that the point of the crime, the point of the punishment is not necessarily purely confirmation of the crime, but it's what? It was public. It was not public, the meaning it was outside, but it was done in a fashion where 4 people happened to see you. So that's the level of the crime that's also even worse. Because if 3 people confirm and they're the most trustworthy and they swear and they do whatever, one of them was a Sahabi you just heard, and Umar didn't take it. He said there's one detail that differs. That's not enough for capital punishment. Now you must be punished. So it's not that he didn't trust this companion. That's the rule. So it's not about just confirmation about the crime. Because people confirm the crime over and over. The Prophet ﷺ turned them away 4 or 5 times. It's not because he wasn't sure. He doesn't want, the Islamic system is not aimed at punishing the people. It prefers for them to repent and to go home, not because there's no confirmation, because it's enough if they confess, or if 3 people say it, it's not enough of a confirmation. Every other crime only takes 2. But the 4, as many of the scholars have mentioned, is because it indicates a level of public or carelessness where it's out in the open. Society will begin to see this and hear about it, and that will destroy the society. Your hand is still up? That's on him, or that's on him. If one of them decides to ruin the story, and when you go into Islamic law, like I said, your mind will be boggled by what you read there. So they say, for example, if it's proven that the ruler, the qadi himself, has a grudge against this person and has a connection to one of the witnesses, the qadi will be punished. He'll be included in the people who are lashed because you had an influence in bringing this case to you or to the other court. Qadi is a judge, is a magistrate of like the locale or whatever. In some cases, it would be the Khalifa. That stopped happening, quite some time. It's quite early on. It was only for some time. And then it became local magistrates and judges. If one of the cases of doubt is if one of them has a proven animosity to the plaintiff, that you've been his enemy for decades. You've always been trying to have it out for him. So that's something that would harm the integrity of the case. So we kept it really brief here because it's not an Islamic fiqh class on penal law. It is just I just want to give us a short overview so we don't just skip over it. And more of anything, it's a deterrent from these heinous crimes. So if the person is lying, let's say all 4 of them lie. If they're lying and they made up this whole story, most likely in cross-examination, something's going to fall apart. It really happened and he lies that it didn't. Yeah. Should have chose a better 4th man that's more trustworthy. Sure. No, this is, so I said in the beginning, it's exclusively a system of Islamic governance with a qadi, a judge, with an Islamic authority that has the ability to fulfill this law. Let's say 4 people witness someone committing zina, or 2 people witness someone apostating, or even killing someone, and they say, hey, Islamic law, we have to kill them. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Even in an Islamic country where that is the law. It's not vigilante justice. They're brought before a court. There's a due process. There's witnesses. There's prosecutors. Maybe not in the traditional, not in the fashion that we're used to today, in like the courts that we see today, but all these things existed. And then the court, the judge has them come before a court, and all this stuff is either proven or disproven. So it's not something that Muslims can do as individuals ever. Not here in a non-Muslim country, or even in a Muslim country that is the law. Where it's, let's say it's the Khilafah, where people used to apply this in the time of the Sahaba. Individuals came to Umar to say this is what happened. They can't do it on their own. They couldn't say, well, okay, everyone agrees, and then they just, it's not how it worked ever. Yeah. So the scholars differed over the female apostate. Some of them said it's the same ruling. And some of them said that she would be imprisoned. And some said that she's given the opportunity to make tawbah indefinitely. And some said, like I said, so that's it. It's either the same ruling or that she's imprisoned until she changes her mind. So it's either the same ruling or imprisonment. And there's a difference of opinion about it. It's a fiqh thing that you check out. Your second question was, and I'll go to your ayah. Second question was, here in a non-Muslim country, what happens? Mhm. Someone leaves Islam, whether even in an Islamic system where this is the law, our job as Muslims is never to take them to court. That's never the objective. And you'll find this again in Islamic works as well, that you witness somebody who is on the fringes of Islam or stepping out. Your job is not to say, hey, I'm going to take you to the court and they're going to execute you. Your job is to bring them back always. And this has been the norm in all of Islamic history from the time of the Sahaba, where people that committed these crimes, the reaction of people around them was primarily to bring them back, to wake them up. It was never to rush to get them punished. It was, it's completely optional always to bring them to court. Some people chose that option, as we saw with the story of Umar. And some people, not some people, the majority of them, scholars and Sahaba and everyone who followed their legacy, they aimed at doing da'wah to these people, trying to wake them up, trying to call them back, trying to help them out of this grievous sin and allow them an opportunity to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the primary objective of the Sharia and us as Muslims always, even in an Islamic system where that is the law. My job is not to say, okay, I'm one witness, let me go get 3 more or 1 more to make sure this is set right. My job is to do my best to bring these people back and to help them not be applicable to this horrible category. Make sense? Yeah. No, not if they just knew them. Just knowing them is not enough of a... Yeah, there's some involvement that's mentioned, like they paid them or they influenced their testimony. Then they're brought in as well. You're now a defendant. Like you're now brought into this court case by having some kind of influence on the witnesses or the direction of the case. Like you are pushing this case to happen, right? Which is equal to coming and saying, I'm raising a case against so-and-so. Even if you're not the one who brought up the case to the court, you're now part of pushing it forward for this person to be punished or executed. So now you're dragged into it as the judge. Any other questions? Go ahead, Adam. Everyone else, you're free to go. I know it's late. I don't want to hold you guys, Jazakumullah khairan, but we'll answer a couple more questions. But if you gotta go, don't worry, I won't be insulted. To protect the society. Let's say somebody sees a murder and says, and 2 people see it, specifically like in the case of murder, right? Nobody would want to hide that. That's the rights of somebody else as being, but something like zina or apostasy. What do I want for this person? I want for them to be guided, right? And them to repent. That's like the ideal for me, especially if someone that's a Muslim. Me meaning any Muslim. That's our ideal. That this person stops the sin, repents, Allah will forgive them. When it comes to murder, that might be the exception. Someone witnesses a murder. You're not going to say, okay, I hope Allah repents on him. That's a right that's been taken from someone in society. There must be restitution, right? And that person must get their rights or their family must get their rights. But in the other sins, then maybe it could be like I can hopefully influence this person to repent. And that's the ideal, that they repent from the sin. They no longer commit it. Allah forgives them. Everybody wins. But let's say as we see in today's society, is Muslim and not, in the absence of these things, where is society headed? Straight down. It's plummeting. And in a lot of Islamic history, this has happened. This isn't new. Even under a khilafah by name, even under Islamic government by name, there's qadis, there's muftis, there are official positions. There's a lot of times where there was non-implementation and the society plummeted. So there was no implementation of the hudud at all. People could drink freely, there were bars. This has happened very, very often. Like you'll find pockets of it in Islamic history where there's no absence of Islamic government. There's no absence of an Islamic army or Islamic judiciary. They're all there, but there's non-implementation. No one collects the zakah, for example. So people have to go, they have their zakah and they just hand it out individually. It's the government's job to collect it and distribute it. So there's pockets of Islamic history where these things disappeared and the society plummeted. And then when it rebounded, it was often, very often, where like there's a change of government or different people take power. It gets implemented in a, I don't want to say drastic, let's say a drastic fashion for a very short amount of time, and then people fall in line. They just realize, okay, it's not a free world anymore. It's not like, it's not the ability, nothing goes anymore. There's actually rules, and the society improves. So this isn't something that we call to as Muslim individuals to implement, but this is the legal system that Islam put in place. It's not the entirety of the legal system. It's the vast minority of it. The rest of the Islamic legal system is focused on so many other things, but this is the Islamic penal code. This isn't a fiqh class where we could dissect each one slowly and there's tons of material. There's an entire 2 semesters that are devoted to the Islamic penal code in the College of Sharia that I went to. It's very, very, very detailed. There's so many other categories, punishments, and details for applying them or suspending them, but this isn't what we're doing here. So if you're interested in that, then start a fiqh class, and the penal code is all the way at the end after you finish everything else. So if you're interested in it, I'm not deterring you, I'm just saying it's a very advanced subject that comes at the very end of fiqh because it is part of Islamic government and legislation. It's not something that the average Muslim does in their everyday life. So the majority of the fiqh books will be devoted to worship, to zakah, to transactions, to family law, and then all the way at the end is qada and hudud, which is qada is judiciary, and then hudud is penal code. It's the minority of our deen, but it gets the most airtime because there's an agenda behind that, to make Islam look barbaric, to make it look backwards, to make it look like it's bloodthirsty and it's searching people's houses. And the biggest irony is, like I said earlier with the other hadith, the biggest irony is the people who are making these claims. Look at their society. Look how many people are killed in extrajudicial killings by the police, or that they're in prison for decades and the evidence is falsified, or the witnesses come forth and they're lying and there's an agenda. How often does that happen in America, for example? It's like every 5 minutes. This, statistics of murder, statistics of STDs, statistics of single-parent households, all of that is from turning to a different way of life, right? And the society is being torn to pieces because of it. And it's something that you could see very, very clearly following trends or just following the news if you have the stomach for it. Any other questions? Sure, I have a lot of questions.
What's the punishment of a person that lies as being witness? Even though, let's say, for example, the person that commits the crime didn't commit it, but in order to make it stick, me as a witness, I decide to lie and force the other witnesses to lie too.
If you get through the cross-examination, that person will be punished. And then on the day of judgment, it's going to be really bad for you.
So even though, so the reason why I'm asking is, even though this person committed the crime, and I know he did, but I falsified the witnessing and everything, I will be punished on the day of judgment.
Of course, you're lying. You're lying in an official, like there's one level of lying which is to lie to each other. And then the highest level of lying is that, shahadatul zur. The Prophet ﷺ advised against it extremely harshly. Someone who claims to witness something that they did not witness. If you didn't witness it, how do you know they committed the crime?
No, I'm just giving you just
I know, but I'm saying, like, I'm not attacking you, man. I know this is just hypothetical. I'm saying if someone didn't witness it, how are they so sure that they're ready to stand in court and say they committed the crime?
I witnessed it, and I'm only one person, but I didn't like this
So that's not Sharia law. That's your own personal vendetta. So you're not in it for justice. You're in it for you.
So then my question, so the point would be is that I would get punished on the day of judgment.
Of course.
And then my question is, let's say for example this happened, and 2 years later it has been proven that all of these people were lying, except for the one guy.
You lost me, to be honest, but you brought something else to my attention that's super important. Everything that we see in our societies and even in our communities where people accuse each other falsely and they bring up these claims and it's not with witnesses, it's the truth of the matter is not as relevant as the gravity of what these people are doing. Making claims against innocent people and their honor and their lives without due process and without the proper evidence. So it being true is not the problem here. Because Islam didn't always come to punish the sinner. In fact, it gives a lot of leeway for the sinner to come back always. But it made this due process because people's wealth and honor and blood is sacred. That's how both hadiths start. And that sanctity can never be violated except by this specific system that Islam says. So hold up. So anybody who tries to circumvent that system or bring claims against people or some other system of accusing people's honor that's outside of this, the entirety of that sin and the corruption of society falls on those people. The people who are saying, no, we want to protect honor. We're doing this to preserve people's honor. And there's some specific examples of this. Maybe I'll mention another time. I'm letting it marinate for a bit to see when to exactly to go to war with it. But for now, hypothetical war or metaphorical, I don't mean physical, but it's important to contextualize in these kind of gatherings. But yeah, so the importance is not on the truth of the claim. It's about due process.
No, that's not my question.
What is your question?
My question was, let's say for example, I had a vendetta against this guy.
Sure.
And I was the only witness. So I collaborated with 3 other people to cause this person to get off and killed.
Okay.
But then you're the card now, right? And you love this guy. And so my question is, because I'm very good at witness tampering and everything, it's on me.
Okay. So what's the problem?
So 2 years later, you realize that I lied.
I don't know what happens then.
So
You might be executed.
that's my question.
Yeah.
So if it's been proven that I lied and I caused 3 other people to lie, right? To get this person to have his due process not fulfilled.
That's what I'm saying. You might be executed because now the punishment is you took a life unjustly.
So has that ever happened?
I don't know if it ever happened. Islamic history is long, and there's a lot of different chapters, so I've never come across it, but my research is not extensive at all. But in that case, you'd be guilty of murder, yes.
So then a capital punishment can be due on the witnesses if they're caught.
Yes. Yeah, because they caused that, and that's something that's mentioned in the chapters of hudud, where what constitutes murder. So one thing is killing a person with something that would kill them. And they mentioned the different categories that anytime this happens, we're going to assume that they want to kill them, like strangling, like drowning. Someone says, no, I just pushed them into the water and, they drowned on their own. They say, no. So they list these things that no excuse will be taken of it was an accident or I didn't mean it. So there's a few tools and methods that are mentioned. Like I said, stabbing, throwing something heavy on someone, strangling, drowning, trapping them without food or water. And then one of those that are mentioned is false testimony to get them killed. That's actually mentioned. Poison. So they mentioned that anytime this happens, we're not going to accept the excuse in Islamic law for a person to say, well, it was an accident or I didn't mean it. No, you came to court and you testified and you swore and the punishment was done and you were watching. There's no way for you to say it was an accidental or anything, or I was angry. That's going to be treated as purposeful murder with intent, and that gets capital punishment. No, you can't. You can't pay 100 camels when it comes unless the family agrees to it. Let's say the family says, you know what, we don't want to take this person's life, we'll take 100 camels. That's on them. But if they don't decide that, then there's no other option.
So I could get away with it if I could somehow take it back.
Now you're starting to worry me a little bit, man. Like, let's talk about it.
Because the point is that it's just about trying to see if there's a leak or something, right? It's a bad way of saying it, but I'm just trying to see that.
There's definitely leaks in normal human perception. The Prophet ﷺ, one of his wives mentioned, I think it was Aisha, that there was an argument outside of his house. So he stepped out. and he sees these two men going back and forth, and he hears both their stories, and he judges, you're right, you're wrong. And then before they leave, he tells them, by the way, I'm a human being. And some of you have better eloquency than others. Some of you are good talkers. So if I give the good talker I judge in his favor because of how good he talks, not because of the truth, then whatever I'm giving him of land or of property or of rights, I'm actually giving him a piece of the fire. Meaning you may pull one on me because I'm a human being, but I'm settling disputes based on what I hear and what I see. So those of you whose evidence is stronger, I will judge in his favor because that's the way the due process works. But if you know you're lying and your evidence appears stronger, but you know it's false, then whatever judgment you take, it's not good for you. Don't think that it's going to be in your benefit. So that's like the general ruling where the qadi is a human being. So it's not something that would make it the truth or not. It may lead to a wrong ruling, and some innocent person is harmed. That doesn't mean the system is broken. At the end of the day, it's human beings that are dishing it out, not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. So the only time for, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعِنْدَ اللَّهِ تَجْتَمِعُ الْخُصُومِ, or as they say, the ayah is, or is that the ayah? We'll double check. But all disputes will gather in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then that's the only time that true justice is meted out to the fullest.
Basically, all these rules just to fix and calm down the society. The ultimate judgment will be on the day of judgment.
Yeah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will dish out the ultimate judgment. This is an opportunity for people's sins to be expiated, as some of the scholars mentioned. And more importantly, it's to protect the society from the most destructive things that will tear it to shreds. Murder, apostasy. And so murder will destroy their physical body. Zina will destroy their morality and their integrity of families. And then apostasy will destroy the most important thing, which is their spirit. So these are the biggest threats to an Islamic society. So the deterrents against them were very severe. That's the summary of the entire hadith. I could have just said that and we could have all went home, right? But I wanted to give you guys a little bit more just because these questions come up often and they do need to be addressed, and you need to understand them as a Muslim living in today's world where these things are constantly under attack and different perceptions are being painted, and you're just waiting to be victimized by it and to feel some type of way about this divine revelation, this beautiful religion, because of the lack of information that you had. That's why I did a little bit more. I hope it worked. I hope it didn't make things worse. If it did, you'll be okay, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Everyone will call a night here. Subhanaka wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Sallallahu wa barak ala sayyidina Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam.